A father is often seen as a beacon of love, joy, and safety for his children. He is meant to be a protector, a guiding light in their lives. But what happens when that figure of security transforms into a source of fear and pain? My father, once my hero, became a nightmare. He turned abusive and confined me to a dark, filthy basement, shattering the very essence of what it means to be a dad. Join me as I share my harrowing journey through the horrors inflicted by the one person who was supposed to love me unconditionally. Tune in to hear my story, a chilling account of survival in the hands of my own father.
Subscribe now to keep enjoying the content.
I lay on the cold, hard floor of my room, staring up at the cracked and stained ceiling. The light from outside, filtered through the single, barred window, casts eerie shadows that dance along the peeling paint. This tiny space has been my entire world for as long as I can remember. The walls, though close and suffocating, hold a strange comfort, a twisted sense of home that I've grown accustomed to. The scurrying of the mice and rats in the walls and floorboards is the only music that fills the silence, a rhythmic serenade to my solitude. I am May, a girl who exists in the shadows, a girl with a name that's been forgotten by the outside world. My body is a prison, a cage of bones and flesh that doesn't work as it should. My father sees me as a burden, a living, breathing embodiment of his failures. He locks me away from the world, from the laughter of children playing outside, from the warmth of the sun, from the sweet smell of food cooking in the kitchen. All I have are the four walls that keep me hidden and the memories of a life that I've only ever seen in my dreams. The door to my room is thick and solid, a heavy barrier that separates me from the rest of the house. It's painted a dull shade of green, the color of mold and decay. I can't remember the last time it was open, the last time I felt the caress of fresh air on my skin. When it does open, it's only to let in the stale odor of the rest of the house and the harsh voice of my father, reminding me of my worthlessness. His words cut deeper than any knife, leaving invisible scars that ache with every beat of my heart. The only time I feel a sense of freedom is when I sneak glances through the bars of my window. I watch the leaves of the tree outside change with the seasons, going from a vibrant green to fiery red and orange, only to fall and leave behind a stark, leafless branch. It's a cycle of life that I'm not allowed to be a part of. I can't help but wonder if the world outside my window knows that I'm here, trapped and alone. Does anyone miss the sound of my laughter, the sight of my smile, or the warmth of my presence? Or am I just a ghost, a fading memory in a world that's moved on without me? My days are a monotonous blur of darkness and occasional light. I spend my time trying to ignore the pain in my body, the hunger that gnaws at my stomach, and the fear that my father might decide to visit. The only company I have is a stray cat that has taken to slipping through a hole in the wall. It's a small act of rebellion against my father's cruelty, a silent friendship that brings me comfort in the bleakness. The cat's fur is patchy and its eyes are clouded, but it sees me, it acknowledges my existence in a way that no one else does. It purrs as it curls up beside me, offering a gentle warmth that feels almost like love. The rain is my only solace. When it comes, it sounds like a million whispers, secrets that the world outside is sharing with me. I imagine the droplets as tiny hands, reaching in to caress my face, bringing with them the scent of a life that I can't touch. The water seeps through the cracks in the wall, pooling into a little puddle that reflects the sadness in my eyes. But it's a sadness that's slowly turning into anger, a rage that simmers deep within me. I'm not just a girl trapped in a room, I'm a person with thoughts and feelings, with dreams that deserve to be chased. And I'm starting to believe that I deserve better than this. In my mind, I drift back to a time before the darkness, a time when my mother's smile was the sun that warmed my world. She had a gentle touch, a way of making me feel seen, even when my body didn't work the way it should. She'd whisper stories into my ear, tales of brave heroines and magical lands, sparking a fire in my soul that refused to die even when she did. My father was different then, his eyes didn't burn with the same hatred they do now. He was a man broken by the loss of his wife, lost in his own grief, unable to see the strength in his daughter. Before the bars on the window, there were days filled with color and sound. I remember the squeals of joy as I played with my cousins, the warmth of the sun on my skin, the taste of ice cream melting on my tongue. I was a girl who dreamed of being a dancer, my heart fluttering to the rhythm of every song that found its way into our home. I'd twirl in the living room, my mother's laughter echoing through the halls, my father's eyes filled with something that resembled pride. But that was before the accident, before the world turned its back on me, and I became the girl who was too much for everyone to handle.
Subscribe now to keep enjoying the content.
The first time the beating started, it was just a slap, a punishment for spilling water on the floor. My father's eyes were red with rage, a rage that seemed to be directed at the very fabric of my being. He shouted at me, called me useless, a waste of space and food. I was too shocked to respond, too stunned by the suddenness of his violence. After that, the slaps became punches, the insults grew louder, and the door was sealed shut for days at a time. One evening, when the house was quiet, and the mice had retreated to their nests, I heard whispers from the kitchen. I knew I shouldn't have, but I couldn't help myself. I leaned my good ear against the cold wall, straining to catch the words. It was my aunt, speaking in hushed tones with my father. "You can't keep her like this," she said. "It's not right." His reply was a cold, hard laugh. "Better here than out there, where she'll just be a burden to everyone else." It was then that I realized the depth of his resentment, the extent of his belief that I was nothing more than a mistake that needed to be hidden away. The abuse grew worse with each passing year, his fists like hammers that shaped my body into something less than human. The food grew scarcer, the water tasting of despair. My clothes, once colorful and filled with life, were now tattered and gray. I watched my reflection in the puddles, the girl I once knew fading away into the shadows. But every time I felt the warmth of the cat's body against mine, every time I heard the sweet whispers of the rain, I knew that I had to survive. I had to find a way to escape, not just for myself, but for the little girl who had once danced in the living room, who had dreamed of a world filled with music and laughter. One day, the beatings stopped. In their place was a cold, calculated cruelty. My father had realized that my body was not the only thing he could control. He started to play with my mind, telling me stories of the cruelty that awaited me outside, of a world that didn't care about someone like me. He'd leave me in the dark for hours, days even, with only the company of my own fears. I clung to the memory of my mother's voice, the way she'd whispered that I was strong, that I could do anything. And in the silence, I found a strength I didn't know I had. One evening, when the moon was high and the house was still, I heard something new. The sound of a key turning in the lock. My heart hammered against my ribs as the door creaked open. My father stood there, holding a candle, the flame flickering in his eyes like a madman's grin. "You're going to learn your place," he said, his voice a knife in the dark. He dragged me out of my room and down into the basement, where he had built a smaller, even more confining space. "This is where you'll live now," he spat, slamming the door shut behind me. I felt the cold, damp concrete against my cheek and knew that this was my new hell. In the basement, the darkness was absolute, a suffocating blanket that swallowed me whole. But even in that black pit, I found a spark of hope. It was there, in the bowels of despair, that I discovered the true extent of my will to live. Every day, I'd push against the walls, my weak arms trembling with effort. I'd whisper to myself, the words my mother had said, the ones that had become a mantra in my mind: "You're strong, May. You're a survivor." And every time I did, the walls would echo back, as if they were whispering the same words. The basement was my tomb, but I was not ready to let it be my grave. The beatings grew more frequent, his anger a living, breathing entity that consumed him. He'd come downstairs, the light from the single candle casting monstrous shadows on the walls. His fists rained down on me, and I'd curl into a ball, trying to protect the parts of me that still felt. But no matter how much he hit me, no matter how much he tried to break me, I remained whole. Each blow was a testament to my resilience, a declaration that I would not let him win. The days turned into a blur of pain and darkness. I lost track of time, the only markers being the moments when the food would be shoved through the tiny slot in the door. It was never enough, but it kept me alive. The rats had grown bold, coming closer to me as if sensing my desperation. I learned to ignore their beady eyes, their nibbling at my toes. They were the only creatures that didn't fear my father's wrath. In a twisted way, I envied them.
Subscribe now to keep enjoying the content.
My body grew weaker, my muscles wasting away from disuse and malnourishment. But my mind remained sharp, fueled by anger and a stubborn will to live. I'd spend hours thinking about the outside world, the one I'd been ripped from. I'd recall every detail of my mother's face, the way the sun felt on my skin, the taste of fresh air. These thoughts became my sanctuary, my escape from the hell I was trapped in. I'd repeat the steps of the dances my mother had taught me in my head, feeling the rhythm in my bones despite my immobile limbs. The beat of my heart became the music that kept me going. The only thing that remained untouched by the filth and despair was the memory of my mother's voice, her stories of brave heroines, and her unshakable belief in me. I clung to her words like a lifeline, whispering them to myself when the darkness grew too thick. They became my shield, a force that protected my soul from the corrosive hate that seeped through the walls. I'd imagine her standing beside me, her hand in mine, leading me out of the basement and into the light. It was a small spark, but it was enough to keep the fire of hope alive within me. My days were spent in a delicate dance with sanity. I'd talk to the stray cat, who had somehow found its way into the basement with me. It became a silent confidant, a listener to my darkest thoughts and fears. When it curled up against me, I'd pretend it was my mother, her warmth and love seeping into my very core. The cat's purrs became the sweetest melody, a reminder that love and kindness still existed in the world, even if it was just outside the bars of my window. And when the candle my father had left for me grew low, I'd watch the flame flicker and dance, a fiery beacon of hope that refused to be extinguished. Each time it threatened to die out, I'd breathe on it, giving it life, a silent promise that I'd do the same for myself. My body was a battleground, a canvas for my father's anger and frustration. Every morning, I'd push my fingers into the cold, hard cement, willing myself to move, to stand, to fight. The pain was a constant companion, but I learned to ignore it, to let it fuel me instead of consume me. I'd whisper the names of the stars my mother had taught me, the only friends I had left in the vastness of the universe. They were my silent witnesses, twinkling beacons of light in the abyss of my existence. I'd trace their patterns in the ceiling, imagining them as a map that could lead me to freedom. The basement was a tomb, but I found moments of beauty in the darkness. The spider webs that hung in the corners were like intricate lace, the only decoration in my stark reality. I'd watch the spiders weave their webs, trapping unsuspecting flies, and wonder if I was any different, spinning my own web of hope and resilience. The water that seeped through the cracks formed little streams, and I'd follow their paths with my eyes, creating rivers in my mind that flowed to the outside world. These small moments of escape were my lifeblood, the air that filled my lungs with the will to survive. But hope was a double-edged sword. With it came the pain of longing, the stark reality of what I was missing. The smell of freshly baked bread from the neighbor's house, the sound of children playing in the street, the warmth of the sun on my skin. These were the things that tormented me, that made me ache with a desire so strong it was almost physical. Yet, hope was also the rope that kept me tethered to life. It was the whisper that said, "You are more than this. You are a daughter of the light, not the shadows." And so, every day, I'd cling to it, letting it pull me through the mire of despair that threatened to swallow me whole. One day, as I lay on the floor, the cat curled up beside me, something shifted. The walls didn't just whisper, they seemed to shout. The rats stopped their endless scurrying, and the basement grew eerily silent. I strained my ears, listening for the usual sounds of the house above, but all I could hear was a faint buzzing, a vibration that grew stronger by the second. It was a sound that didn't belong in my underground prison, a sound that brought with it a sense of urgency. The buzzing grew louder, turning into a knock that echoed through the basement like a drumbeat. My heart skipped a beat, and the cat's ears perked up. It was a sound that was both terrifying and exhilarating. I knew that knock, that it meant someone was at the front door, someone from the outside world, a world that had long forgotten about me. The knob rattled, the wood groaned, and suddenly, the door swung open, spilling a flood of light into the room. I squinted, my eyes unaccustomed to the sudden brightness, and there, standing in the doorway, was a woman I didn't recognize. She looked at me with a mix of shock and horror, her hand covering her mouth.
Subscribe now to keep enjoying the content.
"May," she whispered, her voice trembling. It was my aunt, the one who had once pleaded with my father to show me kindness. "Oh, my sweet girl." She rushed to my side, her touch gentle as she helped me to my feet. I stumbled, my legs shaking with weakness. It had been so long since I'd felt the touch of another human being that I didn't know how to respond. But there was something in her eyes, something that told me she wasn't there to hurt me. She was there to save me. The next few minutes were a blur. She wrapped me in a warm blanket, her arms around me, and we made our way up the stairs. Each step was a declaration of freedom, a silent shout to the heavens that I was no longer alone. As we reached the top, the light grew brighter, and the air grew thicker with the scent of life. I could hear the muffled sounds of sirens in the distance, a symphony of hope that grew louder with each passing second. The door at the top of the stairs was open, revealing a world that was both alien and familiar. I stepped into the light, and for the first time in years, I felt the warmth of the sun on my face. The rain had stopped, and in its place was the promise of a new beginning. The whispers of the rain had turned into a shout, and someone had finally heard my call for help. My father was nowhere to be seen, his rage having evaporated like the storm that had once been our lives. My aunt explained in hushed tones that she had called the authorities, that they were here to take me away from this hellhole. The house was filled with people, their faces a kaleidoscope of concern and disbelief. They moved around us, talking in low voices, their eyes never leaving me. I could see the pity in their gazes, but I didn't care. All I cared about was the warmth of the sun and the gentle touch of my aunt's hand in mine. As we moved through the house, the memories of happier times flooded my mind, mixing with the stench of despair that clung to the walls. The living room where I had once danced now held the echoes of my father's cruelty. The kitchen, where the smell of my mother's cooking had once filled the air, was now cold and empty. But there was no time for goodbye. My aunt led me to the waiting car, her eyes filled with a mix of tears and determination. She whispered in my ear, "You're safe now, May. I'll never let him hurt you again. Please forgive me for not coming to your rescue earlier. I truly wanted to be there for you, but your father's threats against my life made it impossible. He harassed and frustrated me relentlessly, leaving me no choice but to flee for my own safety. Even as I ran, your face was seared into my mind, and you remained in my heart every single day. The guilt of leaving you behind has weighed heavily upon me, but I vowed that I would return to save you, no matter the cost. I am so sorry I couldn't be there when you needed me most, but I am here now, and I will do everything in my power to make it up to you and ensure your safety. Please, find it in your heart to forgive me. I promise I will never abandon you again." The drive to her house was a journey through a landscape that had changed so much in my absence. The buildings looked taller, the trees bigger, the cars more numerous. Each passing moment was a revelation, a reminder of the world that had continued to turn without me. When we arrived, her home was a sanctuary, a bastion of light and warmth that enveloped me like a soft embrace. The smell of food cooking on the stove was like a siren's song, beckoning me to a place of safety and love. In the days that followed, I learned to walk again, my legs protesting with every step. The physical therapist was a kind woman, her eyes filled with compassion as she pushed me to regain my strength. My aunt hovered nearby, her own eyes never leaving me, as if she feared that if she looked away, I might vanish like a ghost. The nights were filled with the sweet sound of silence, no more screams or the pounding of fists. In their place was the gentle hum of a heating vent, a lullaby that promised tomorrow would be better. The process was slow and painful, both physically and mentally. The doctors said my recovery would take time, that the scars on my body were a testament to the ones in my soul. But each day, as I looked out the window at the world that was now mine to explore, I felt a little more like the girl who had once danced in the rain. The whispers of the rain had led me to safety, had brought me back to a world of color and sound. And in the quiet moments, when the house was still, I'd close my eyes and let the memory of my mother's voice fill me up, whispering that I was strong, that I could do anything. And with every beat of my heart, I believed her a little more.
Subscribe now to keep enjoying the content.
One evening, as I sat in the warm embrace of my aunt's living room, the TV flickered to life. A news report played, the face of a local detective on the screen. He spoke of a young girl, held captive in a house of horrors, rescued by a concerned aunt. My heart raced, and the room grew blurry around the edges. It couldn't be me, could it? The girl in the story was a ghost, a figment of my imagination, not someone who was being talked about in the real world. The detective spoke of the bravery of the young girl, of her will to survive despite the unspeakable cruelty she had endured. And as the camera panned out, I saw it, the house, my prison, with police tape across the door, a stark reminder of the life I had left behind. The room grew quiet, the only sound the hum of the TV and the racing of my heart. My aunt looked at me, her eyes filled with tears, and whispered, "May, it's over." The world had found me, had reached into the shadows and pulled me out into the light. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Social workers, doctors, therapists, all coming and going, their faces a blur of concern and kindness. They talked of rehabilitation, of finding me a new home, a new life. The words were like a soothing balm on the raw wounds of my past. And through it all, my aunt remained steadfast, her hand in mine, her love a constant presence that helped to soothe the fear that still lurked in the corners of my heart. She knelt beside me, her eyes filled with understanding. "May," she said softly, "this is now your new home, a place where you can dance in the rain again." And in that moment, as she took my hand, I knew that I wasn't just a survivor, I was a warrior, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The shackles of fear had been broken, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly seen. The news of my father's arrest spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The whispers grew into shouts of anger and disbelief. The man who had been a silent specter in my life was now the monster that everyone talked about. They had found him, cowering in the very room where he had kept me for so long, the room that had been my prison and my sanctuary. He was charged with neglect and abuse, his cruelty laid bare for all to see. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, a weight lifted from my shoulders, a weight that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. The days turned into weeks, and the whispers grew quieter. I watched from the safety of my aunt's house as the police cars came and went, as the news vans lined the street, their cameras capturing the house that had been my cage. Each time I saw it, I felt a little more detached, a little less like the girl who had been trapped there. The basement that had been my tomb was now a crime scene, a stark reminder of the life I had left behind. But the outside world was a puzzle, one that I had to piece together with trembling hands. The sounds of cars and laughter, the feel of grass under my bare feet, the warmth of the sun on my skin, it was all so overwhelming, so beautiful. And amidst the beauty, the horrors of my past began to fade, like a bad dream slowly receding into the shadows of my mind. My father's face grew blurry, his voice a distant echo, as the warmth of the sun began to fill the cracks in my soul. The world had found me, had rescued me, and now it was my turn to find my place in it. The trial was a blur of faces and words that didn't seem to fit together. The prosecutor spoke of my father's cruelty in a voice that was strong and clear, while my aunt held my hand, her grip tightening with each accusation. The whispers grew louder in the courtroom, the air thick with the weight of the truth. And when the verdict came, guilty as charged, the room seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. He was taken away, the darkness that had haunted me for so long now contained within the bars of a cell, no longer able to touch me. The whispers grew faint as I stepped into the light, into a future that was mine to shape. The rain had stopped, the clouds parted, and the world was a canvas of possibility. With each step, I grew stronger, my body relearning the rhythm of freedom. And in the quiet moments, when the world was still, I'd close my eyes and let the memory of my mother's voice fill me up, her stories of brave heroines echoing in my soul. The girl who had once danced in the rain was back, ready to face the world, ready to conquer it. The whispers of the rain had led me to this moment, had carried my cries for help to the ears of those who could save me. And now, as I looked out the window of my new home, I knew that I was ready to write my own story. The pages were blank, the ink was in my hand, and the world was waiting. The girl who had been forgotten was now a beacon of hope, a testament to the strength that lies within us all. The rain had washed away the shackles of my past, leaving me free to dance in the rain once more.
Subscribe now to keep enjoying the content.
My aunt's house was a sanctuary, a place where love and warmth filled every corner. She had given me a room with a real bed, one that didn't smell of mold and despair. The walls were a soft pink, the color of sunsets and new beginnings. And outside my window, the same tree that had watched over me during my years of captivity stretched its branches, welcoming me back into the world. Each leaf was a page in my story, a reminder of the resilience that had carried me through the storm. In the months that followed, I learned to live again. The scars on my body began to heal, the bruises fading into the background like the shadows of a forgotten nightmare. The physical therapy was grueling, but with each new step, I felt a little more like the May who had once danced across the living room floor. And in the quiet moments, when the house was asleep, I'd sneak into the kitchen and dance, the floorboards groaning under my tentative steps. The cat would watch from the shadows, its eyes gleaming with pride. But the real dance was happening inside me. I was rediscovering who I was, who I could be. The whispers of the rain had turned into a roar, a thunderous applause for the life I was building. I went to school, made friends, and found joy in the simple things, a good book, a warm cup of tea, the sound of laughter. And every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a warrior staring back, a girl who had survived the worst and come out the other side, ready to face the world. The story of my rescue had become a rallying cry for those who had suffered in silence, a beacon of hope for those still trapped in their own cages. People talked of the strength it took to survive, the resilience that had kept me going. And in those whispers, I heard my mother's voice, her gentle encouragement to be the heroine of my own tale. It was a tale of courage, of finding light in the darkest of places. And as I grew stronger, as the whispers grew louder, I knew that I had a responsibility to use my voice. I started speaking out, sharing my story with anyone who would listen. I talked to classes, to support groups, to anyone who needed to hear that they were not alone. The words that had once been my silent companions in the basement now became a weapon against the darkness, a tool to shine a light on the hidden corners where others like me might be trapped. The whispers of the rain had become a storm of awareness that was sweeping through the world, demanding that abuse and neglect be acknowledged, that every voice be heard. The world had found me, and now it was my turn to find it. I danced in the rain, my feet moving to the rhythm of freedom, my heart beating with the strength of 1,000 stars. The whispers had turned into a crescendo, a symphony of hope that I carried with me wherever I went. And in the end, it was not just my own story that was being written, it was the story of every child who had been locked away, every soul that had been ignored. We were the whispers that had turned into a storm, and together, we were unstoppable. As I stood on the stage, my voice echoing through the auditorium, I knew that I had found my purpose. The message was clear, every whisper counts, every tear is a drop in the storm that will change the world. And as the audience applauded, their faces a sea of admiration and solidarity, I felt my mother's presence beside me, her hand in mine. The dance of my life had begun anew, and the music was the sweetest sound I had ever heard.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to help our channel grow.